Welcome to 5 Minute Friday. My name is Jim Putnam. 5 Minute Friday videos are videos where we show off something that we're currently doing in our Raleigh, North Carolina garden and something that you may need to do in yours as well. The weekly garden planner is available over on HortTube.com, and it is a week by week task in the garden over the course of a year if you're interested in a more detailed version of what 5 Minute Fridays are. In this video, I transplanted a Camellia sasanqua. This is one that I actually had grown at my nursery, rooted years ago. It made its way through all the transporting and ended up in a spot here along the path and was too big for where it had originally been planted. This was actually planted in the ground before the paths were put in place and before everything was going on. Always knew we were gonna move it back, but we had some temporary fencing back here and some other things. So finally got the right spot, the right timing to do it. Maybe about a month ago or so, in a video, we root pruned it. And I think it was maybe a 5 Minute Friday. It was a 5 Minute Friday video on root pruning to prepare plants to be moved. And so what I did was I came in here and I cut around those roots and just literally prepared. I cut the biggest roots off of it, but I didn't go in there and tear all the little fibrous roots down at the bottom or cut a tap root or anything like that below it. And I just got it where it would just wiggle just a bit. And then we just let it sit here for another month. And now today, February 14th, happy Valentine's Day. As I'm filming this, I slid it back to here. This leafy evergreen shrubs, this is definitely the best time to do it, is gonna be in the late winter or very, very early spring, okay? This Camellia is really great because it bloomed back in fall and it doesn't set flower buds again until summertime. So I can get in here and do whatever pruning I want to do on it, and it's not going to cost me a single flower. I want to reduce the top on it to compensate for the amount of root damage that I did to it. And frequently I would have gone ahead and pruned it when I root pruned it. You know, that's typically how I would do it, but I wanted to just kind of talk through both at the same time. Okay, so again, it got root pruned, then it was left alone, and then this morning I came in and cut around the rest of it, got it where it was ready to move, and then I can take my shovel and I can kind of measure the width. You know, once I've got it where I can get it out of the hole, I can come over here, use my shovel, figure out about the width that my hole needs to be, the new hole needs to be. Then I'll go a little bit wider than that when I dig the hole. And then I can measure the depth of the root ball that I've managed to cut out, okay? And then I can carry my shovel over here and just measure the depth of the hole and get that hole prepped. We want to leave the plant out of the ground as little time as possible, okay? So typically we're going to be moving something further than 4 feet. So you need some way to do that. So I'll get the plant ready, dislodged from the ground basically, but not out of the hole. Get the hole prepped, and then we have I'll grab this cart real quick, Steph, and pull it back this direction. We have this little low cart. This would be a good tool to use where I could pull it up in this little low cart and move it. Or more frequently, when as a landscaper, we would just have a tarp and we would put, if we could, sometimes you can't get into places that you're trying to go and, you know, well, we would pull the plant out of the hole into a tarp and then just slide it where it was going. What you would like to avoid doing, but sometimes has to be done, is to have to pick that root ball up and that plant up and drop it into a wheelbarrow and then wheelbarrow it someplace, because the more you're moving it, the more soil you're knocking off of it. I will say, we've improved this soil so much in this garden that I have a clay-based soil. So down below all this organic material is a clay base, but all these plants have rooted mainly into my very improved soil that was done with wood chips and compost and other things. And when I'm digging things out, I lose a lot of soil off the root ball, more than I would like. I'd love to be getting a little more soil, but every single time I'm moving something here now, I now see that having amended the soil this much does not allow for very much soil to go with the roots when I'm transplanting something. All that means for me is that I'll reduce the top a little more than I would otherwise. So it's best to compensate, pruning the top back to compensate for some of the root loss that we had. I will say, backing up to the old hole, I always get asked, what should I fill that hole in with? As much of the native soil as you can. So I'll feather soil from the surrounding area back into that hole as much as possible. I don't want to dump a bunch of organic material or something like that in a hole. And then that's where all the rain's gonna go and all the water's gonna go, and it's gonna create potentially anaerobic conditions in that spot. So if you can, feather soil back into that old hole. Then back over here, I'm just going to I'm gonna tip prune virtually every branch on this plant. Tip prune means just stop that terminal growth that's on the end. And then the more stretched growth that I have up here, I'm gonna go ahead and cut it back in height and get rid of some of this material. Just again, all I'm trying to do is compensate for the fact that I just did a tremendous amount of root damage to this plant. When I slid it over here into this hole, I initially just moved soil back around it and then lightly tamped it with my foot. We're not trying to go, like this, especially this time of year. The best time of year to be transplanting these things. For deciduous shrubs like this hydrangea, pretty much any time they're without leaves, you can do it. So anytime between late fall and now, as they're thinking about leafing out, is a great time. These leafy evergreen shrubs, I prefer to do them this time of year, February, March. I just feel like this is the best time to do these leafy evergreen shrubs because, winter stress won't be as bad on them because we've passed probably the worst of the cold that we're gonna get. But when I get up here, my point here is I'm doing this at a time of year when the soil tends to be moist. And I'm standing in my beds, compacting the soil. And then if I get in here and I start stomping on this soil like this, I'm gonna stomp all the air out of that. And I'm going to make it super compact around that plant. So I wanna lightly tamp it. And then if you see in the video, I take the back of my shovel and I lightly tamp in there because there's roots in there that I can't get the soil in between those roots. Okay, so if I take the bottom of that shovel, I can just, basically bouncing that thing around, you'll see soil start to fall in around that root ball. And that's how I tamp that soil in there without over compacting it. And then I come back in and mulch it with whatever once it's tamped in there. And in this case, it's leaves in this part of the garden. But again, reducing the size of it to compensate for the amount of root damage we did is probably the most important thing. Now, since fertilizing wise, happens to be the time of year I fertilize the garden. So that's the only reason this thing's gonna end up getting fertilized in the next few weeks. But if I was moving it, sometimes you're forced to move something in June, just happens. Make sure that you don't try to do it in the evening if you were gonna do something like that and get it done as quick as possible, but you wouldn't fertilize it that time of year. That's kind of my point. So the only time of year I'm going to fertilize is the time of year I fertilize, which is February, March, early April, something like that. Other than that, I'm not fertilizing. So if it happens to coincide with the time you're moving the plant, that's okay. But otherwise, I'm not going to go out of my way to. I don't want to push this plant, right? I just took half its roots away, so I don't want to sit here and go, hey, now grow, and kind of push it. That would not be a good idea. Believe it or not, I actually put the worst side toward my path. I put the bare side of the plant this direction. I think most everyone would have put that plant in, put that fuller side facing the path and gone, yeah, this is squared up. I actually want to move it over here, prune it back, put the bad side this direction toward the sun and allow this to fill back in. And I think overall I'll end up with a much fuller plant doing it that way. But again, I think other folks might have stood back and put the best side facing the path. Once I tap that soil in and then put my mulch back, and again, leaves in this case, I'll get the water hose over here and water it in just a little bit to settle it in just a little bit more. Again, I want to settle that soil back around those roots because a lot of oxygen around those roots could actually damage them. But again, I don't want to over compact it and I don't want to fill that entire hole up with water either. So there's just try to get it tamped in, get the area moist, get your mulch back in place, and then get back to other projects in the garden. There probably is a limit to the size of a root ball that you could handle yourself at some point. If you're dealing with something that's, got a 3 or 4 inch caliper and, the root ball is going to end up, like this, you may want to get some help, a neighbor or hire somebody or something. There's definitely a limit to this. You'll find that most of these ornamental shrubs, after we plant them, let's say we plant them in a 7-gallon container that's this deep. If I'm planting out here in this clay-based soil, when I come back a year later and dig the thing out of the ground, a lot of the roots that are at the very bottom will just have died. but there's just no oxygen down there. There's no way for the roots to really survive down there. And what you'll find is the root ball got flatter and wider in time, and most of the things you're digging out will need as wide as you can go and kind of a flatter bottom pan to them, but that's not always true. Things like pecan trees have tap roots, so you might want to look up the plant you're transplanting first, and you may find some little key piece of information for that particular plant. I moved to Camellia in this video because if you look up transplanting camellias, people will tell you camellias are difficult to transplant. I don't find them particularly difficult to transplant. I think if you get as much of the root material out as you can, you do it at the proper time, you do it on a cool day. It's actually we got frost on the windows this morning, and you cut back some portion of the plant, not butcher it. I don't want to take it down here into the hard wood down there. I just want to slow down any growth that may be coming on it pretty soon. And I do it when the soil's moist. So you definitely want to water ahead of time if it's dry. But again, this time of year tends to match the cool nights, moist soil, the plant's not actively growing, and all the conditions are kind of right to be moving things. Some things you'd be moving this time of year, let's say I was moving a loropetalum or an azalea or a forsythia or something that blooms just in the next few weeks. That's a decision you kind of have to make, but in terms of pruning that thing back. Because if I move an azalea today and I prune it back, I'm not going to get spring flowers on it. But my success rate in moving that azalea will be exponentially higher, having taken those flower buds off of it and not asking it to flower 3 weeks after I dug it out of the ground and slid it over somewhere. So, that's just kind of the sacrifice sometimes you have to make. If you wait till after it flowers, then that plant's going to be in an active growth phase. It's going to be warming up super fast outside, and you're going to definitely increase the chance of actually killing it in the process of moving it by waiting for those flowers to happen. So your best to just do it in the late winter, early spring. Once the worst of the winter's over, we're going to get some more cold nights on this thing, but I've got it mulched down here. It shouldn't have any issues, and not wait until later in the spring or early summer. Although sometimes you just have to. Sometimes you're getting construction done on the house and you got to move something. Just do it in the evening if you're doing it at that time. And the most important thing, and probably the thing I should have led this video off with, is call 811. If you've moved into a new house, or you've been in a house for a long time and you've never done it, if you're going to be doing any extensive digging in your yard, you may want to call 811 and make sure that there's no lines buried in that space. This plant could have been planted right over the top of your cable line or your, whatever, electric line, whatever, gas line, and make sure that none of those things. And then once you have those lines marked in your garden, I would have them, map them someplace so that you can refer to it in the future or recall them in the future and have them remarked. But that's the thing I should have led this video off with, is making sure you know where all of your underground buried lines are. So there you go. There's the 5-minute, much longer than 5-minute Friday on transplanting a camellia in our garden here in Raleigh, North Carolina. Thanks for watching.